Commander Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of the UES Horizon as the transport vessel approached the massive Galactic Council station. The structure was unlike anything he had ever seen in his 35 years of life. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, its surface covered with docking bays, communication arrays, and living quarters for dozens of alien species. Lights of different colors blinked across its hull, each one representing a different civilization. That called this place home. Jake adjusted his dress uniform and checked his reflection in the polished metal wall beside him. His brown hair was neatly combed, his blue eyes sharp with determination. The weight of humanity's future rested on his shoulders, and he felt every gram of that responsibility. He was not just a commander today, but Earth's first official representative. To the galactic community that governed this sector of space, the docking procedure took 3 hours, as alien traffic controllers guided the human vessel to its assigned berth. Jake watched through the viewports as ships of incredible variety moved around the station. Some were sleek and graceful like silver arrows, others were massive and blocky like floating cities. Each design reflected the species that built it. And Jake tried to memorize as many as possible for his reports back to Earth. Captain Helen Price, the Horizon's commanding officer, joined him at the viewport. She was a veteran of the outer colony routes and had volunteered for this historic mission. Her weathered face showed both excitement and concern as she watched the alien vessels. "Never thought I'd see something like this when I first started. Flying cargo runs to Mars," she said quietly. Jake nodded, sharing her amazement. "Command briefed me on what to expect, but seeing it in person is different. Each one of those ships represents a civilization that has been traveling the stars for centuries while we were still learning to fly." The docking clamps engaged with a solid thud that vibrated through the ship's hull. Jake gathered his diplomatic materials and prepared to make history. His mission was simple in concept but complex in execution. He needed to present humanity's application for membership in the Galactic Council, negotiate trade agreements, and establish Earth as a legitimate player in interstellar politics. The airlock opened with a hiss, and Jake stepped into a corridor that seemed designed for beings much taller than humans. The ceiling stretched 3 meters above his head, and the walls were covered with symbols from dozens of different languages. The air smelled of ozone and something floral that he could not identify. A delegation of 3 aliens waited for him. In the corridor, the leader was tall and thin with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Its voice came through a translation device attached to its chest. "Welcome, Human Representative Morrison. I am Coordinator HFY of the Council Reception Committee. We will escort you to your quarters and brief you on station procedures." Jake bowed slightly, a gesture he had practiced for weeks. "Thank you, Coordinator. I am honored to be here and look forward to working with all council members." The walk to his quarters took 20 minutes through corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jake saw creatures with scales, others with fur, some that seemed to be made of crystalline material. Most ignored him completely, but a few stopped to stare at the human with obvious curiosity. Some whispered among themselves in languages the translation device could not handle. His quarters were modest but comfortable, designed with adjustable furniture that could accommodate different body types. The walls displayed a view of the local star system, with Earth's sun visible as a tiny dot in the distance. Jake unpacked his belongings and reviewed his notes. One final time before his first official meeting, the council chamber was enormous, with seating arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Representatives from 43 different species filled the seats, their various forms creating a bizarre but fascinating mosaic of galactic life. Jake took his assigned position in the newest section, reserved for potential members and observers. The session began with a series of routine matters handled in efficient, business-like fashion. Jake listened carefully, trying to understand the political dynamics at play. It quickly became clear that certain species held more influence than others, and the most powerful voice belonged to the Vorthic Empire. High Commander Thexville was an imposing figure even among the diverse assembly. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. His eyes glowed with an inner fire, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. When he spoke, other representatives fell silent. The Vorthic Empire has concerns about the human application for membership, Dexville announced when Jake's turn came to present. These beings have existed in space for barely a century. They have no understanding of galactic law, no respect for established territories, and no technology worth sharing. Jake stood and activated his presentation system, displaying holographic images of human achievements. Honorable representatives, humanity may be new to interstellar travel, but we have much to offer. Our engineering capabilities, our adaptability, and our dedication to peaceful cooperation make us valuable potential partners. Dexville's laugh was like metal scraping against stone. Peaceful cooperation? Your species has spent its entire history in constant warfare. You cannot even achieve unity on your own planet, yet you seek to join civilizations that have maintained peace for millennia. Several representatives nodded in agreement, but Jake noticed that not all of them seemed convinced. A graceful being with silver skin and large, expressive eyes watched the exchange with obvious interest. This was Ambassador Kira Veltar of the Zilani, and Jake had read that her people valued fairness and justice above all else. High Commander Dexville raises valid concerns, Jake replied carefully. Humanity has indeed faced conflicts, but we have learned from our mistakes. Our application includes detailed proposals for contributing to galactic security and sharing our unique perspectives on problem solving. Unique perspectives? Dexville's voice dripped with contempt. What could primitives possibly teach civilizations that mastered space travel when your ancestors were still using stone tools? Ambassador Veltar stood, her voice clear and melodious. Perhaps we should allow Representative Morrison to complete his presentation before passing judgment. The Zilani have always believed that diversity of thought strengthens the Council. Other representatives shifted uncomfortably. Jake sensed underlying tensions that had little to do with humanity's application. The Zilani support seemed to anger Dexville, whose glowing eyes fixed on her with obvious displeasure. The Zilani are, of course, free to waste their time on hopeless causes, Dexville said. But the Vorthic Empire will not support membership for a species that lacks the maturity to govern itself properly. Jake felt his diplomatic training take over, keeping his voice steady despite the insult. I understand the Council's concerns and am prepared to address them in detail. Humanity requests only the opportunity to prove our worth through actions, not words. The session continued for 2 more hours, with various representatives asking questions about human technology, government, and intentions. Most seemed genuinely curious, but Dexville's supporters repeatedly interrupted with skeptical comments. Jake answered each question as thoroughly as possible, but he could feel the mood of the chamber growing less favorable. When the session finally ended, Jake found himself alone in his quarters. Composing his first report to Earth, the weight of the day's events pressed down on him as he chose his words carefully. The message was encrypted and sent through the communication array that connected the station to human space. Initial contact completed. Reception mixed at best. Dominant faction led by Vorthic Empire shows strong opposition to human membership. Some support from Zilani and minor species, but they appear to lack influence in crucial decisions. Recommend preparation for extended negotiations. They're not taking us seriously. We need to change that. Jake sealed the message and prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Outside his window, the stars shone with the light of countless civilizations, most of which had never heard of humanity. His job was to make sure they would remember Earth not as a backward planet of primitives, but as a world worthy of respect and partnership. The diplomatic game had begun, and Jake Morrison was determined to play it better than anyone expected from a species that had only recently learned to reach for the stars. The future of human expansion into the galaxy depended on his success, and failure was not an option he was willing to consider. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison's first appearance before the Galactic Council, and the situation had not improved. Every morning he would wake in his quarters aboard the massive station, review his notes, and prepare for another day of diplomatic battles that seemed impossible to win. The Vorthic Empire had made their position clear from the beginning, and they showed no signs of changing their minds about humanity's application for membership. Jake sat in the council chamber for the 15th time, watching as High Commander. Dexville systematically destroyed every proposal he presented. The human request for trade agreements was rejected because Earth's technology was deemed too primitive. The application for territorial rights in neutral space was denied because humans allegedly lacked the wisdom to govern themselves properly. Even simple requests for cultural exchange programs were blocked with claims that human influence would corrupt younger species. The other representatives watched these proceedings with varying degrees of interest and concern. Some, like the insectoid Kryn delegation, seemed genuinely curious about humanity, but were too afraid to openly oppose Vorthak wishes. Others, particularly the wealthy Therian merchants, appeared more concerned with maintaining profitable relationships with the Empire than with questions of fairness or justice. Ambassador Kira Veltar remained Jake's only consistent supporter, but her people's influence had been declining for decades. The Zelani had once been a major power in the council, but years of Vorthic expansion had weakened their position. Still, she continued to speak up during sessions, asking pointed questions that highlighted the unfairness of the proceedings. High Commander, you claim that humanity lacks technological sophistication, Veltar said during one particularly heated exchange. Yet their achievements in space travel and planetary engineering are impressive for such a young species. Perhaps we should judge them by their potential rather than their current limitations. Dexville's scaled face twisted into what Jake had learned was the Vorthic equivalent of a dismissive smile. The Zelani have always been sentimental about lost causes. Your own people's decline should serve as a warning about the dangers of supporting the weak. The insult hung in the air like a physical presence. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to challenge Dexville directly. Jake felt his hands clench into fists under the table, but he forced himself to remain calm. Losing his temper would only prove the Vorthic claims about human instability. After the session ended, Jake returned to his quarters feeling more frustrated than ever. His reports to Earth had grown increasingly pessimistic, and he knew that patience was wearing thin back home. The human government had invested enormous resources in this diplomatic mission, and they expected results. Jake was beginning to wonder if those results would ever come. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from his door. Jake opened it to find a small, furry creature wearing the robes of a Korith merchant. The being's large eyes darted nervously around the corridor before it spoke in rapid, high-pitched tones. Representative Morrison, I bring urgent news from the border sectors. A human vessel has been intercepted by Vorthic patrol ships. The crew has been detained and charged with espionage. Jake's blood ran cold. Which ship? When did this happen? The U's Navigator, under Captain Lisa Harper. They were taken 3 days ago near the Kepler station system. The Vorthic claim the vessel was in restricted space, but my people's records show the area is neutral territory. Jake thanked the merchant and immediately began composing an emergency message to Earth. The situation had just become far more serious than a simple diplomatic rejection. Human lives were now at stake, and the Vorthak had effectively taken hostages. The next morning brought a hastily called council session. Dexville stood at the center of the chamber, his imposing form radiating satisfaction as he addressed the assembled representatives. The Vorthic Empire has apprehended a human vessel engaged in illegal reconnaissance activities. The crew will face trial under imperial law for violations of territorial sovereignty. Jake shot to his feet, his diplomatic training barely containing his anger. The UES Navigator was operating in neutral space according to all recognized star charts. This is an act of piracy, not law enforcement. The territory in question has been under Vorthic protection for over 2 centuries, Dexville replied smoothly. Our records clearly show the boundaries were established long before humans developed space travel. Jake knew this was a lie, but he also knew that the Vorthak had the power to alter historical records to support their claims. Without military backing, his protests would be meaningless. He looked around the chamber, hoping to find support among the other representatives. Ambassador Veltar stood slowly, her silver skin pale with emotion. This is a concerning development. The Zilani request full disclosure of all evidence against the human crew. The evidence is classified for security reasons, Dexville said dismissively. But I can assure the Council that the case is quite clear. The humans were gathering intelligence on our defense installations with obvious hostile intent. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized the hopelessness of the situation. The Vorthak had manufactured charges against Captain Harper and her crew, and there was nothing he could do to help them through diplomatic channels. The Empire controlled the legal system in their territory, and they had already decided the outcome of any trial over the following days. Jake worked desperately to find some way to help the captured humans. He met with every representative who would speak to him, appealing to their sense of justice and fairness. Most listened politely but offered no real assistance. They were too afraid of Vorthak retaliation to take meaningful action. The breakthrough came during a private meeting with Ambassador Veltar in her quarters. The Zilani woman's home reflected her people's love of beauty and harmony, with soft lighting and gentle music creating a peaceful atmosphere. But her expression was troubled as she shared disturbing intelligence. My sources within the Empire tell me that the Vorthak plan to make an example of your people, she said quietly. They intend to execute the crew publicly to demonstrate their power and discourage other species from challenging their authority. Jake felt the room spin around him. Execute them? For what? Navigation errors? For being human, Veltar replied sadly. Vexville sees your species as a threat to Vorthak dominance. He believes that crushing you now will prevent future challenges to his empire's authority. Jake stood and paced across the room, his mind racing through increasingly desperate options. Military rescue was impossible without starting a war that humanity could not win. Diplomatic pressure had already failed completely. The only remaining choice was to appeal directly to Earth for help, but he knew that any response would take weeks to arrive. There's something else, Veltar continued. Several species are growing tired of Vorthak domination. The Karath merchants, the Zilani, even some of the smaller delegations are beginning to question the Empire's methods. They lack the strength to oppose Dexville directly, but they might support a stronger challenge to his authority. Jake stopped, pacing, and looked at her with new hope. What kind of challenge? I do not know, she admitted. But I sense that the galaxy is ready for change. The Vorthak have ruled through fear for too long, and fear eventually breeds resistance. That night, Jake composed what he believed might be his most important message to Earth. He encrypted it with the highest security protocols and sent it through the station's communication array. The message was brief but urgent. Situation has deteriorated beyond diplomatic solution. Vorthak Empire has detained navigator crew on false charges. Captain Harper and 12 others face execution within days. Empire seeks to make example of humanity to maintain their control over other species. Some allies available but lack military capability. Request immediate guidance and support. They've taken our people. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. We need options. Jake sealed the message and prepared for what he knew would be the most difficult period of his career. The diplomatic phase of humanity's introduction to galactic politics was ending, and he feared that what came next would be far more dangerous for everyone involved. Captain Harper and her crew were counting on him to find a solution, but Jake was beginning to realize that some problems could not be solved with words alone. The stars outside his window seemed dimmer that night, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for what would come next. The mock trial began at dawn in the main council chamber, with representatives from across the galaxy forced to witness what High Commander Dexville called justice. Captain Lisa Harper and her crew of 12 were displayed in glowing energy cages that hummed with power, their bodies trapped in painful positions designed to show their helplessness. The sight made Jake Morrison's stomach turn, but he forced himself to watch from his assigned seat among the other ambassadors. Harper was a veteran of the outer colony routes, A woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that had seen the worst of space travel. Her uniform was torn and dirty from days of imprisonment, but she held her head high as she faced her accusers. The other crew members looked exhausted and frightened, but they followed their captain's example and refused to show weakness too. Their captors. The Vorthok prosecutor was a massive creature with scales that seemed to shift color in the chamber's lights. His voice boomed through the translation systems as he presented what he claimed was overwhelming evidence of human treachery. These criminals were caught gathering intelligence on our defense installations, he declared, activating holographic displays that showed the navigator's path through space. Their mission was clearly hostile, designed to prepare for a future invasion of Vorthok territory. Jake knew the evidence was fabricated, but the prosecutor presented it with such confidence that some of the watching representatives began to nod in agreement. The holographic displays showed the navigator taking sensor readings near Vorthok stations, but Jake recognized the data as routine navigation scans that any responsible captain would perform in unknown space. The human vessel was equipped with advanced scanning equipment, the prosecutor continued, far beyond what would be needed for simple exploration. This proves their aggressive intentions and justifies the harshest possible punishment. Jake stood to object, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. The scanning equipment you describe is standard on all human exploration vessels. Captain Harper was conducting routine navigation surveys in what our charts clearly show as neutral space. The Vorthok Tribunal leader, a creature even larger than Nexville, dismissed Jake's words with a wave of his clawed hand. The human representative's protests are noted but irrelevant. The evidence speaks for itself. The trial continued for hours, with the prosecution presenting increasingly absurd claims about human military capabilities and territorial ambitions. They showed images of Earth's defensive installations and claimed they were proof of humanity's warlike nature. They played recordings of routine military communications and twisted them to suggest invasion plans. Captain Harper was finally allowed to speak in her own defense. Her voice was hoarse from days of captivity, but her words rang clear in the chamber. We are explorers, not invaders. Our mission was to map safe passage routes for future trade vessels. We had no hostile intentions toward any species in this sector. The prosecutor laughed, a sound like grinding metal. The accused claims peaceful intent, but her vessel was armed with weapons capable of destroying our patrol ships. How does she explain this aggression? Those weapons are defensive systems, Harper replied firmly. Any ship operating in unknown space needs protection from pirates and debris fields. We never fired on your vessels or threatened your stations. Jake watched the proceedings with growing despair. The tribunal had already decided the outcome before the trial began. Every piece of evidence was interpreted to support the prosecution's case, and every defense was dismissed as human deception. The watching representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none dared to challenge the Vorthok version of events. Ambassador Veltar leaned forward in her seat, her silver skin pale with emotion. May I ask why the human vessel was detained rather than simply escorted from the area if territorial violation was the only concern? The tribunal leader's eyes blazed with anger at the question. The Zelani delegation will limit itself to observing these proceedings. This court does not require advice from species that cannot control their own territories. The insult was deliberate and cutting. Jake saw Veltara's hands tremble with suppressed rage, but she remained silent. The Vorthok were making it clear that any challenge to their authority would be met with similar humiliation. As the trial moved toward its predetermined conclusion, Jake realized that his diplomatic options were exhausted. The Vorthok had created a perfect legal framework for their actions, and no amount of protest would change the outcome. He began to formulate desperate plans for rescue attempts, knowing they would likely fail but unable to abandon Harper and her crew. The moment that changed everything came when Jake requested permission to consult with his government about the tribunal's decision. High Commander Thexville had been watching the proceedings with obvious satisfaction, but Jake's request seemed to trigger something deeper than annoyance. You will accept the tribunal's judgment, Dexville growled, rising from his seat. Humanity will learn to respect the authority of their betters. Jake met the alien's blazing eyes without flinching. I have the right under diplomatic protocols to communicate with my government. This trial violates every principle of galactic law. You have no rights here, Dexville snarled, his massive form towering over Jake. You are primitives playing at civilization, and it is time you learned your place. The High Commander's clawed hand moved faster than Jake could dodge, striking him across the face with enough force to send him staggering. 3 deep gashes opened across his cheek, blood flowing freely onto his diplomatic uniform. The pain was immediate and intense, but Jake remained standing, his blue eyes never leaving Dexville's face. The council chamber fell silent. Even among the Vorthak's strongest supporters, striking a diplomatic representative was considered a grave violation of civilized conduct. The attack was being broadcast live across the galactic communication networks, and Jake knew that billions of beings were watching this moment. Several alien representatives gasped in shock. The Korath merchants whispered among themselves in obvious dismay. Even some of the Vorthak delegation looked uncomfortable with their leader's actions, but Dexville seemed drunk on power and confident that no one would dare challenge him. Jake wiped blood from his face with the back of his hand, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an edge that made even the Vorthak guards step back. The words came from somewhere deep inside him, a place where diplomatic training gave way to something far more primal. You have just made a very serious mistake, he said, looking directly into the broadcast cameras. You wanted to know what humans are capable of. You're about to find out. The chamber erupted in whispered conversations as representatives processed what they had witnessed. The Dexville's assault had crossed a line that even his allies could not ignore. The carefully constructed legal framework of the trial was crumbling under the weight of his own actions. Ambassador Veltar was the first to move. Rising from her seat to help Jake, her touch was gentle as she examined his wounds, but her voice carried steel when she spoke. This attack on a diplomatic representative is an act of barbarism that shames us all. Other representatives began to stand, their voices joining in condemnation of the Dexville's actions. The Korath merchants declared the trial invalid. The insectoid Kryn delegation demanded an immediate recess. Even some of the minor Vorthak allies began to distance themselves from their leader's behavior, but Jake knew that words alone would not save Harper and her crew. The Vorthak Empire still controlled the station's security forces, and Dexville's rage was only growing stronger. The High Commander's assault had revealed the true nature of his rule, but it had also made him more dangerous than ever. That night, Jake sat in his quarters composing what he believed might be his final message to Earth. His face was swollen and painful, but his mind was clear. The diplomatic phase of humanity's introduction to galactic politics was over, and what came next would determine the fate of both his species and the galaxy itself. They've crossed the line, he wrote, his fingers steady on the keyboard. Harper and her crew face execution within 72 hours. I've done everything I can through diplomatic channels. It's time to show them who we really are. Jake sealed the message and sent it through the communication array, knowing that his words would reach Earth in less than a day. The response, when it came, would change everything. The message reached Earth 18 hours after Jake Morrison sent it, arriving at Terra Command headquarters in the middle of the night. Fleet Admiral Sam Carter was pulled from his sleep by an urgent call from the communications center, his gray hair disheveled as he rushed to the secure briefing room in his bathrobe. The video message that awaited him changed everything in an instant. Jake's bloodied face filled the screen, the 3 deep gashes across his cheeks still fresh and painful. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with controlled fury as he delivered his report. The assault on a human diplomatic representative was bad enough, but the impending execution of Captain Harper and her crew was an act of war that could not be ignored. Within 2 hours, the president had authorized Operation Righteous Fury, the largest military deployment in human history. But the response that followed went far beyond anything the government had planned. The video of Jake's assault spread through human networks faster than any official announcement, reaching every colony, every space station, and every ship in human space. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Corporate shipyards that had been building cargo, haulers and mining vessels immediately began converting their products for military use. Private security companies volunteered their fleets for government service. Civilian pilots who had never fired a shot in anger signed up for crash courses in combat flying. The response was not just military but deeply personal, as every human who saw Jake's bloodied face took the assault as an attack on their entire species. Admiral Carter stood in the main command center at Terra Command, watching as reports flooded in from across human space. The orbital shipyards around Earth were working at maximum capacity, welding weapon systems onto civilian vessels and loading them with whatever military equipment could be found. The scene was being repeated at every major human settlement, from Mars to the outer colonies. "Admiral, the corporate council is offering every ship in their fleet," reported Commander Betty Ross, Carter's chief of staff. "They're saying this is bigger than profit margins now." Carter nodded grimly as he watched the tactical displays. Private companies were donating vessels worth billions of credits, asking for nothing in return except the chance to support their fellow humans. The response was unlike anything in human history, a mobilization that went beyond government orders to something primal and fierce. Captain Don Torres was typical of the civilian volunteers. He had spent 15 years hauling cargo between the inner planets aboard his vessel, the UES Liberty. When he saw Jake's message, he immediately contacted the nearest military base and offered his services. Within hours, his cargo ship was being fitted with missile launchers and defensive shields, transforming it from a peaceful merchant vessel into a weapon of war. "Never thought I'd be flying into combat," Torres told his crew as they watched technicians install the weapon systems. "But nobody hurts one of ours and gets away with it." The military response was equally swift and comprehensive. Colonel Nina Roberts led the Marine battalions preparing for station assault, her troops training for combat in the cramped corridors of an alien space station. The Marines had studied every available blueprint of the Galactic Council station, preparing for a rescue mission that would be unlike anything they had ever attempted. "The station has multiple defensive systems," Roberts briefed her officers, "but they're designed to repel external attacks, not internal boarding actions. If we can get inside, we can move through the civilian sections without triggering their main defenses." Admiral Susan Blake took command of the main battle fleet. Her flagship, the U.S. Defiance, leading a formation of humanity's most advanced warships. The Defiance was a kilometer-long dreadnought built for deep space combat, its weapon systems capable of destroying entire fleets. But Blake knew that firepower alone would not be enough to save Jake and the captured crew. "We need to be precise," she told her fleet commanders during their final briefing. "One mistake, and we could trigger a galactic war that humanity cannot win. But we also cannot allow this aggression to go unanswered." The fleet that assembled in Earth orbit was unlike anything humans had ever created. 300 vessels of every size and description, from massive military dreadnoughts to converted cargo ships, all united by a single purpose. The site was visible from the planet's surface, a constellation of ships that represented humanity's determination to protect their own. Meanwhile, on the Galactic Council station, Jake used his remaining diplomatic immunity to coordinate secretly with Ambassador Valtara and other sympathetic species. The Vorthic assault had shocked many representatives, creating opportunities for alliance that had not existed before. Species that had cowered under Vorthic rule for decades were beginning to whisper about resistance. "The Korath merchants control the station's supply systems," Veltar explained during a clandestine meeting in her quarters. "They have agreed to provide intelligence about Vorthak defensive positions. The information will be transmitted on frequency 77 Alpha when your fleet arrives." Jake felt a surge of hope for the first time since his assault. The alien allies were limited in what they could do openly, but their support would be crucial for any rescue attempt. "What about the Zilani security forces?" We have people in key positions throughout the station, Veltar replied. When the time comes, we will jam Vorthic communications and disable their internal defenses. But you must understand that this will be seen as an act of war by the Empire. Jake nodded solemnly. We understand the risks. But we cannot abandon our people to Vorthic justice. The coordination extended beyond the council chamber. Jake managed to get a message to Captain Harper through an old human code, tapping it against the walls of the detention area during his daily walks. The message was simple but crucial. Help is coming. Be ready. Harper received the message during her exercise period, recognizing the rhythm immediately. She passed the word to her crew, and they began preparing for whatever rescue attempt was coming. They had no weapons and no way to fight their guards directly, but they could be ready to move when the opportunity presented itself. The Vorthic remained confident in their superiority, making minimal preparations for any human response. High Commander Thexville had ordered the execution moved up to demonstrate his power, but he showed no concern about retaliation. His intelligence reports suggested that humanity lacked the military capability to challenge the Vorthic Empire directly. Let them come, Thexville told his subordinates. Their primitive ships will be destroyed before they can even reach the station. This will teach the other species what happens when they support human foolishness. The High Commander's confidence was shared by most of the Vorthic military. They had ruled through superior technology and overwhelming force for centuries, and they could not imagine that a species barely capable of interstellar travel could pose a serious threat to their empire. But as the human fleet prepared for departure, something fundamental was changing in the balance of galactic power. The assault on Jake Morrison had awakened something in humanity that had been dormant during their peaceful expansion into space. The diplomatic phase of human-alien relations was ending, and what came next would reshape the galaxy forever. The ships began moving toward the jump point, their engines creating a light show visible across the solar system. Every human who watched knew that history was being made, that their species was about to announce its presence on the galactic stage in a way that could never be ignored or forgotten. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the fleet form up for the jump to hyperspace. The weight of command pressed down on him as he realized that the decisions made in the next few hours would determine humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. All ships report ready for jump, his communications officer announced. Carter took a deep breath and gave the order that would change everything. Jump! The fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving Earth behind as they raced toward a confrontation that would either establish humanity as a galactic power or destroy them completely. The die was cast and there was no turning back. The execution was scheduled for the main council chamber at noon, with representatives from across the galaxy forced to watch what High Commander Thexville called the final judgment. Captain Lisa Harper and her crew of 12 were brought in heavy shackles, their faces showing the strain of days in captivity, but their spirits still unbroken. The energy cages that had held them during the trial were replaced with a simple platform in the center of the chamber, designed to give every representative a clear view of what was about to happen. Jake Morrison stood with the other ambassadors. In the viewing area, his face still bearing the marks of Thexville's assault 3 days earlier. The wounds had healed enough that he could speak without pain, but the 3 parallel scars would remain for the rest of his life. He watched Captain Harper with a mixture of admiration and despair, knowing that his diplomatic efforts had failed. To save her and her crew, Ambassador Veltar stood beside him, her silver skin pale with emotion. She had worked tirelessly to find some legal avenue to stop the execution, but the Vorthic legal system was designed to serve their political needs rather than any concept of justice. The other sympathetic species could only watch in horror as the Empire prepared to murder innocent humans to make a political point. Thexville entered the chamber with obvious satisfaction, his massive form dominating the space as he took his position at the head of the tribunal. His glowing eyes swept across the assembled representatives, enjoying their discomfort at what they were about to witness. The High Commander had dressed in his finest ceremonial armor for the occasion, the dark scales gleaming under the chamber's lights. Today we deliver justice for the crimes committed against the Vorthic Empire, Vexvol announced, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. Let this serve as a reminder to all species that our authority cannot be challenged without consequences. The Vorthic executioner was a massive creature with arms like tree trunks and eyes that showed no emotion. He carried a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and an energy projector, designed to cause maximum pain before death. Captain Harper looked at the weapon without flinching, her gray hair hanging loose around her shoulders, but her back straight with dignity. Jake felt his hands clench into fists as he watched the preparations. Every instinct told him to rush forward and try to stop what was happening, but he knew that such an action would only result in his own death without saving anyone. The Vorthak guards were positioned throughout the chamber, their weapons trained on the human crew and ready to fire at the first sign of resistance. Just as the executioner raised his weapon above Captain Harper's head, every screen in the chamber suddenly lit up with the same image. The massive displays that normally showed council proceedings now showed something that made even the Vorthic guards step back in shock. 300 human vessels had just dropped out of hyperspace around the station, their formation so perfect that it looked like a work of art against the starfield. The ships ranged from massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the local defense fleet to small, civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for war. But what struck everyone who saw them was not their size or number, but the precision of their arrival. They had appeared simultaneously in a coordinated drop that spoke of military planning and technological capability that the Vorthak had never suspected humans possessed. Admiral Susan Blake's voice echoed through the station's communication systems, her words clear and carrying absolute authority. This is the United Earth Space Force. You have assaulted our representative and illegally detained our citizens. You have exactly one opportunity to release them unharmed and stand down. You have 60 seconds to comply. The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations as representatives processed what they were seeing. The Vorthak had claimed that humanity lacked the technology and organization to challenge their empire. But the fleet surrounding the station told a very different story. The ships were arranged in a formation that covered every possible escape route while avoiding damage. To the station itself, Vexvol's confidence wavered for the first time since Jake had met him. The High Commander looked at the displays showing the human fleet, his glowing eyes trying to process what he was seeing. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice barely audible through the translation system. Intelligence reports said they had no significant military capability. Jake felt a surge of pride as he watched his people's response to the crisis. The fleet that surrounded the station represented more than military might. It represented the fundamental human principle that no one would be abandoned to their enemies. Every ship and every crew member had volunteered for this mission, knowing that they might not return home. Captain Don Torres commanded the converted cargo ship US Liberty, now bristling with weapon systems that had been installed in the frantic hours before departure. His voice crackled through the communication system as he addressed the Vorthak defenders. "This is Captain Torres of the Civilian Defense Force. We're here to bring our people home. Stand down now and no one needs to get hurt." The Vorthak fleet began moving to intercept the human ships, their commanders still confident in their technological superiority. Admiral Blake watched their approach on her tactical displays, her expression calm despite the enormous stakes. The Vorthak had more ships in the immediate area, but they were scattered and unprepared for the coordinated assault they were about to face. "All ships, weapons free," Blake commanded. "Target their command vessels first. Let's show them what human engineering can do." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human weapons, designed through centuries of warfare on Earth, tore through Vorthak shields like they were made of paper. The Empire's ships were built for intimidation and overwhelming firepower, but they were not designed to face enemies who fought with desperate determination and superior tactics. The Vorthak command ship lasted less than 5 minutes under concentrated fire from the UES Defiance. Its commander fled in an escape pod, leaving his crew to face the human assault alone. Ship after ship fell to the precisely coordinated human attack, their wreckage drifting in space as testament to the price of underestimating humanity inside the station. Jake shed his diplomatic demeanor and revealed the combat training that all human ambassadors received. When the Vorthak guards turned their weapons toward the human prisoners, Jake moved with lightning speed. His years of military service before joining the diplomatic corps had prepared him for exactly this moment. Ambassador Veltar and her Zalani security forces had been waiting for this moment. Throughout the station, they turned on their Vorthak overseers, using their knowledge of the station's systems to disable communications and defensive weapons. The Korath merchants locked down crucial systems, trapping Vorthak reinforcements. In their quarters, the coordinated uprising spread through the station like wildfire. Species that had cowered under Vorthak rule for decades suddenly found their courage, inspired by humanity's decisive action. The Empire's authority, built on fear and intimidation, crumbled in minutes when faced with organized resistance. In the council chamber, Jake reached Captain Harper just as the Vorthak executioner swung his weapon. The human ambassador blocked the strike with his body, taking a glancing blow that sent him staggering but saved Harper's life. The captain's bonds were electronic, and the station's power fluctuations caused by the battle disrupted them enough for her to break free. "About time you showed up," Harper said with a grin as she helped Jake to his feet. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about us." Jake smiled despite the pain in his shoulder. "Humanity doesn't abandon its own. We brought some friends too. Make sure you got home safely." High Commander Thexville watched his empire's reputation crumble in real time. The species that had obeyed him for decades now stood tall, their fear replaced by hope for the first time in years. The carefully constructed political structure that had kept the Vorthak in power was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The battle outside the station was already over, with human ships maintaining position around the defeated Vorthak fleet. The message was clear to everyone who witnessed it. Humanity had announced its presence on the galactic stage with overwhelming force, and they were prepared to protect their interests and their allies. Jake helped free the remaining crew members while Valtar coordinated with the other species to form a new council structure. The Vorthak Empire's territorial claims were dissolved, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy's smaller species had a voice in their own governance. Captain Harper stood beside Jake as he addressed the reformed council, her uniform torn but her dignity intact. "Today you witnessed what happens when humanity is pushed too far," Jake said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "We came here seeking peaceful cooperation, but we were met with violence and injustice. We answered that violence with overwhelming force." He paused, looking directly at the representatives who had remained silent during the Vorthak persecution. "You supported one human when no one else would." "We answered with an entire fleet. That's what we do for our allies. That's what we do for each other. And that's what we'll do for anyone who stands."